Dr. Amelia Hartley sat hunched over her desk, bathed in the cold glow of her computer screen. The laboratory around her was quiet, the rhythmic hum of the machines blending with the ticking of an old-fashioned wall clock she had installed herself. Time, in this sterile environment of quantum physics and high-energy research, was usually measured in milliseconds, nanoseconds even. But for Amelia, the slow, deliberate tick of the clock was a comforting reminder of something solid, something constant in the fluid chaos of her work. She had been working on the theory for over a decade. Time manipulation, the ability to bend, fold, or even reverse the very fabric of time itself. At first, it had been dismissed by her peers as wild speculation, the kind of theoretical physics better suited to science fiction novels than academic journals. But Amelia had persisted. She knew there was something there, something real, and now, after years of calculations, simulations, and trials, she was on the brink of proving it. Just a few more adjustments, she muttered to herself, her fingers dancing over the keyboard. The device in front of her, a sleek, cylindrical apparatus about the size of a coffee mug, was the result of countless late nights and failed experiments. The Chronos Engine, she had named it. Unimaginative, perhaps, but there was no denying the elegance of the name, a nod to the Greek god of time, who had always fascinated her. It was powered by a quantum particle she had discovered, which had the curious ability to exist simultaneously in two different points in time. Harnessing that power had been the breakthrough of her career. Now, she was ready to test it on a small scale. Just a few seconds, she thought. Nothing too risky. Amelia leaned back in her chair and took a deep breath, staring at the device as if it were a coiled snake ready to strike. Her heart pounded in her chest, and for the first time in years, she felt a strange, almost primal fear. What if it worked? And what if it went wrong? She shook her head, dismissing the thought. This was the culmination of her life's work. It had to be done. Amelia reached out and pressed the button on the Chronos Engine. The machine emitted a soft, low hum, the air around it shimmering faintly as the quantum field came to life. She set the parameters for a 5-second reversal, and with one final glance at the clock, she activated the device. The world around her seemed to ripple, the very air warping and twisting like a reflection on the surface of disturbed water. Amelia felt a strange pull, as though her body was being stretched across some invisible plane. Then, as quickly as it had begun, the sensation was gone. She blinked, disoriented. The clock on the wall had ticked backward by 5 seconds. It worked. Amelia stared at the clock, her mouth dry, her hands trembling slightly. The implications of what she had just accomplished were staggering. Time travel, real, tangible time manipulation, was no longer a fantasy. She had done it. But as the initial wave of triumph washed over her, a darker thought crept into her mind. What now? What did this discovery mean, not just for her, but for the world? The ability to manipulate time wasn't just a scientific breakthrough. It was a power, a dangerous power that could reshape reality itself. Amelia closed her eyes, forcing herself to think clearly. This was too big, too risky. She couldn't release this technology to the public, not without fully understanding the consequences. She needed more tests, more data, and most of all, she needed control. Over the next few weeks, Amelia threw herself into the work, testing the Chronos Engine in increasingly complex scenarios. At first, it was simple things, reversing the flow of time in a controlled environment for a few seconds, then a few minutes. She experimented with objects, watching as they reverted to their previous states. Shattered glass reassembled itself. A burnt matchstick reignited. Each test was a success, but each also brought new concerns. What would happen if she extended the duration of the reversal? Would the effects become unstable? And what about living organisms? Could time be reversed for a human without catastrophic results? Her curiosity gnawed at her, but so did her fear. She had seen what even the slightest miscalculation in quantum physics could do. She had seen the failed experiments, the anomalies that defied explanation. One wrong step, and the consequences could be irreversible. One evening, as she sat alone in the lab, staring at the Chronos Engine, a sudden thought struck her. What if she could prevent tragedy? What if she could go back in time, just far enough to undo some of the world's greatest disasters? The idea was intoxicating. Amelia had always been a woman of logic, of reason, but there was something undeniably seductive about the thought of using her invention to change the course of history. She thought of her father, a man who had died too young, taken by a sudden heart attack when she was still a teenager. What if she could go back and warn him? What if she could save him? No, she pushed the thought away. The Chronos engine wasn't ready for something like that. Not yet. Weeks turned into months, and Amelia continued her work in secret, pushing the boundaries of what was possible with time manipulation. She began to extend the range of the Chronos engine, experimenting with larger time reversals. 1 minute, 2 minutes, 5. One day, after a particularly grueling test session, she collapsed into her chair, exhausted. She rubbed her temples, trying to ease the pounding headache that had become a constant companion. As she sat there, her mind drifted back to the idea she had tried to suppress. Her father. She had always blamed herself, in some small way, for his death. He had been working too hard, pushing himself too much, and she hadn't said anything. She had been too absorbed in her studies, too focused on her own life to notice the signs. And then, one day, he was gone. Amelia stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. She walked over to the Chronos engine, her heart racing. The device sat on the table, humming softly, almost as if it were waiting for her. What if she could go back? Just for a few minutes. Just enough time to tell him to slow down, to take care of himself. She could save him. Her hands shook as she adjusted the settings on the Chronos engine. She set the parameters for a 2-hour reversal, just enough time to go back and change things. Her finger hovered over the activation button, her mind racing. This was it, the moment of truth. She pressed the button. The familiar sensation of being pulled across space and time washed over her, stronger this time, more intense. The world around her blurred, twisting and warping as the quantum field expanded. For a moment, she felt as though she were being torn apart, her body stretched across the fabric of reality. Then, with a sudden jolt, it was over. Amelia opened her eyes, her heart pounding. She was no longer in her lab. She was standing in her childhood home, in the kitchen, the smell of coffee and bacon filling the air. Her father stood at the stove, humming to himself as he cooked breakfast. For a moment, she couldn't move. She couldn't speak. The sight of him, alive and well, was almost too much to bear. "Dad," she whispered. He turned, smiling at her. "Morning, Amelia. You're up early." Her throat tightened, and she had to force herself to stay calm. This was it. This was her chance to save him. "Dad," she said, her voice trembling, "you need to slow down. You're working too hard. I think something bad could happen if you don't." He frowned, wiping his hands on a towel. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" "I mean," she struggled to find the right words. "I just don't want you to push yourself too hard." "Okay, maybe take some time off. Get some rest." He chuckled, walking over to her and placing a hand on her shoulder. "I appreciate the concern, Amelia, but I'm fine. Really, I've got a lot of work to do, but I'll be okay." She shook her head, tears stinging her eyes. "Please, Dad, just promise me you'll take it easy." He studied her for a moment, his expression softening. "All right, I promise. I'll slow down. Just for you." Amelia exhaled, the weight on her chest lifting slightly. She had done it. She had saved him. But as the relief washed over her, something strange began to happen. The air around her seemed to ripple, just as it had when she activated the Chronos engine. She felt a strange pressure building, a tension in the fabric of reality itself. Before she could react, the world around her began to twist and distort. Her father's face blurred, his voice echoing in her ears, distant and warped. The walls of the kitchen seemed to melt away, dissolving into nothingness. Amelia stumbled, her vision darkening, her heart pounding in her chest. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. The Chronos engine had malfunctioned. When she awoke, Amelia was back in her lab, the Chronos engine humming softly on the table in front of her. Her body ached, her mind reeling from the disorienting experience. She sat up slowly, blinking as her surroundings came into focus. She had made it back, but something felt off. The lab was the same, but there were subtle differences. The walls seemed darker, the air heavier, as though the very atmosphere had changed. And when she looked at the clock on the wall, her blood ran cold. The clock had stopped. Panic surged through her as she scrambled to her feet. She rushed over to the computer, her fingers flying over the keyboard as she checked the data from the Chronos Engine. The readings were wrong. The quantum field had destabilized, creating an anomaly in the space-time continuum. Amelia's heart raced as she realized what had happened. Her attempt to change the past had created a ripple effect, a fracture in the fabric of time itself. The very laws of reality were unraveling. She had to fix it. She had to go back and undo what she had done. With shaking hands, she reset the Chronos Engine, adjusting the parameters to reverse the damage. She had to go back to the moment before she activated the device, to stop herself from altering the timeline. But as she prepared to press the button, a thought occurred to her. What if going back again made things worse? What if every time she tried to fix the past, she only caused more damage? Her mind raced, torn between the desire to undo her mistake and the fear of making it worse. She had opened Pandora's box, and now there was no way to close it. Amelia stood frozen, her finger hovering over the button, her mind filled with doubt. Time was unraveling around her, and every second she hesitated, the fracture grew wider. She closed her eyes, taking a deep breath. There was no turning back now. She had to try. With a trembling hand, she pressed the button. Amelia's heart raced as she felt the familiar pull of the Chronos Engine once more. The world around her twisted and distorted, the air warping as though the very fabric of reality was being stretched thin. The sensation of being ripped through time was stronger this time, more violent, more chaotic. She gripped the edge of the desk as the lab seemed to blur into nothingness. Then suddenly everything went still. Amelia blinked, trying to steady her breath. The disorientation took longer to subside this time. She looked around cautiously, expecting the world to snap back into focus. But something was wrong. She wasn't in her lab. She was standing in the middle of a street. It wasn't just any street. This was her hometown. The familiar rows of houses, the same bakery on the corner, the park where she used to play as a child. It was all there. But it felt off. The colors seemed muted, the sky dull, the air too still. It was as if she were standing in a reflection of her world, a distorted echo of reality. She spun around, searching for some clue as to where, or rather when, she had landed. People walked by, their faces blank, their movements mechanical. They didn't seem to notice her, didn't even glance in her direction. It was like she was invisible. "What is this?" she whispered to herself. She began walking, her steps tentative, her mind racing with possibilities. Had the Chronos Engine malfunctioned again? Had she landed in some alternate timeline? Or had she fractured time so severely that this was all that remained? As she turned a corner, her heart lurched. There, standing on the sidewalk, was her father. He was exactly as she remembered him. The same warm smile, the same kind eyes. But he wasn't looking at her. He was talking to someone, a younger version of herself. Amelia watched in stunned silence as her younger self laughed at something her father had said, her face bright and carefree. The scene sent a jolt of emotion through her. She had been here before. This was a memory, one of the last moments she had shared with her father before he passed away. Amelia stepped closer, her breath shallow. This couldn't be real. It was just a memory, a moment in time that had already passed. But as she reached out, something strange happened. The scene began to distort, the figures of her father and younger self flickering like a broken projection. "No," she whispered, her heart pounding. "No, no, no." The world around her began to warp, the buildings twisting and bending, the ground shifting beneath her feet. It was as if reality itself was unraveling. Amelia stumbled backward, her hands shaking. She had done this. Her attempt to change the past, to fix what had already happened, had created this fracture in time. And now, the very fabric of reality was collapsing. She had to stop it. She had to find a way to repair the damage before it was too late. But how? Amelia's mind raced as she tried to make sense of what was happening. The memory of her father and her younger self had been shattered, leaving nothing but a void where the street once stood. The sky above had darkened, the air heavy with a sense of impending doom. She needed to get back to the lab. She needed the Chronos Engine, but in this warped version of reality, it was nowhere to be found. As she stood there, trying to regain control of her thoughts, a voice called out to her. Amelia! She froze. The voice was calm, steady, and strangely familiar. She turned slowly, her eyes widening as she saw a figure standing at the edge of the void, a figure that looked exactly like her. It was another version of herself. The other Amelia stepped forward, her face expressionless, her movements deliberate. You shouldn't have done it, she said softly. Amelia took a step back, her heart racing. Well, what is this? The other Amelia tilted her head slightly, studying her. This is the consequence of your actions. You've broken time, fractured reality. And now, you have to make a choice. A choice, Amelia repeated, her voice trembling. What choice? You can try to fix it, the other Amelia said, or you can let it collapse. Either way, you can't undo what's been done. The past is gone. You can't save him. Amelia's chest tightened, the weight of those words crushing her. She had been so sure that she could change things, that she could save her father. But now, standing here in the midst of this fractured reality, she realized the truth. Time wasn't meant to be rewritten. The past was the past for a reason. She swallowed hard, her mind racing. If she couldn't save her father, then what was left? Could she at least stop the collapse of reality? Could she find a way to repair the damage she had caused? How? Amelia asked, her voice barely a whisper. How do I fix this? The other Amelia's expression softened slightly. You have to let go. You have to accept that some things are beyond your control. Only then can the fracture be healed. Let go. Amelia's voice shook. You mean let go of him? The other Amelia nodded. And let go of the idea that you can control everything. Time isn't something to be bent to your will. It flows, it moves forward, and it carries us with it. Amelia's eyes burned with tears, the weight of her actions crushing her. She had been so desperate to change the past, to undo the pain of losing her father, that she hadn't realized the cost. She had broken time, fractured reality, and now she had to make the hardest choice of all. She had to let him go. Amelia stood at the edge of the void, the fractured remnants of her memory fading into darkness. The other version of herself waited patiently, watching as she struggled with the decision. Could she really do it? Could she accept that her father was gone, that she couldn't save him, and that trying to rewrite the past had only made things worse? She took a deep breath, her heart aching with the weight of the choice she had to make. I'm sorry, Dad, she whispered. I'm so sorry. With trembling hands, Amelia reached into her pocket and pulled out the Chronos Engine. The device hummed softly in her palm, the quantum field still active, still capable of bending time. But she knew what she had to do. She had to destroy it. Amelia looked up at the other version of herself, who gave her a small, sad smile. You're doing the right thing, the other Amelia said. Amelia nodded, her throat tight with emotion. She held the Chronos Engine in both hands, her fingers tightening around the device. Then, with a single, decisive motion, she crushed it. The world around her seemed to ripple, the air shimmering as the quantum field collapsed in on itself. The void began to recede, the fractured pieces of reality knitting back together. The sky brightened, the ground solidified, and the distorted remnants of her memory faded into the distance. Amelia stood there, watching as the world righted itself, her heart heavy with the weight of what she had done. She had let go. She had accepted the past for what it was. And in doing so, she had saved the future. The other version of herself slowly faded away, leaving Amelia standing alone in the now restored street. The wind blew gently through her hair, the sun warm on her face. It was over. She had made her choice. Back in her lab, Amelia sat in silence, staring at the empty space on her desk where the Chronos Engine had once been. The room was quiet, The ticking of the old wall clock the only sound that broke the stillness. She had given up the one thing that could change time, the one thing that could have rewritten history. But in the end, she had realized that time wasn't meant to be controlled. It was meant to be lived one moment at a time. And now, she would move forward just as time always had.